I actually want to do leadership lessons from Luke slightly differently today because I want to read about the crucifixion, which is what Easter is about. Actually, no, it's not. Easter's about the resurrection. Let's be honest. But leading into it is obviously the crucifixion of Christ, the sacrifice of Christ, and obviously there's so many leadership lessons from Luke, but actually reading through this passage, I actually couldn't pick, because normally we'll pick like one kind of key verse or part of it, and like that'll be our lesson from it. But reading through this, there was almost every single line had a leadership lesson in it. And I really felt like I'm gonna maybe kind of preach from it a little bit. I mean, I want to read through the whole thing, but I'm just going to stop and say, here's a lesson for us. Stop. Here's a lesson for us. And Dr. Rod's going to jump in and interrupt me as well if he's got something to say as well for each of these points. But I'm just going to read through this. I'll try to do it as quickly as we can. But I think it's important. It's really important as we learn to become united, as leaders standing united. Look at how we're able to stand united through the crucifixion. As they led him away, Jesus away, they seized Simon from Cyrene, who was on his way from the country, and put the cross on him and made him carry it to behind Jesus. It was funny that earlier we were talking about followership, Dr. Rodden, that you were talking about, like, what's it to be a 2IC? Sometimes when we're leading, we actually do have to carry the burden of those around us. And the beautiful thing that I see from here is he was just available. He was there. He was available. And I think that's part of a key of being a leader, is just being there and available. And sometimes, yes, we have to carry the burden. And I'm sure he didn't think it at the time, but now looking back, what an honor to be able to carry that, that burden for Christ. Dr. Rod, I'm gonna look up to you, because I'm sure you've got something to add for each bit. So I'll just look up to you when I'm, wait for you to share.
Well, poor old Joseph, he didn't have much choice in the matter, did he?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When he was ordered, because obviously Jesus was far too weak. He'd been scourged. He was, and you see, he'd actually also been, how should I say, gravely assaulted when he was appearing before Caiaphas, the high priest, I should say, and the Sanhedrin. So he was scourged under Roman law, he was very badly beaten by the religious leaders. So that's something to keep in mind.
He hadn't slept the night before either.
Well, no, of course not. So he was physically incapable of actually carrying that cross. But Joseph, he was ordered to, and Simon, I'm sorry.
Yes.
I called him Joseph twice, I think, but Simon was ordered by the Romans to carry that cross. He really didn't have much say in the matter. And look, sometimes as leaders, we don't have a lot of say in the matter.
Yeah, that's good.
And we just have to recognize that from time to time, and know when is the right time, as it were, to pick our fights and to say, no, this obviously wasn't one of those times.
That's really good, Dr. Rod. Thank you. Now, verse 27, a large number of people followed him, including women who mourned and wailed for him. I think for me, this speaks to, obviously, we talk about being leaders. There's fruit in being a leader, and that fruit is, obviously, I say this, and I don't even know where this comes from, but, if you're a leader and no one's following you, you're just going for a walk. Like if you're a leader, there should be people, like there should be a crowd that follows you. And I think what's beautiful about this is there's women who mourned and wailed for him. Like, do you have that much of a positive impact on those people around you that they will mourn you if you leave? They will mourn you if you're going through a trial. You know, we talk about Trump earlier on. How many people are actually mourning and wailing for him? I don't know that there are that many, but I think that's a key. That's kind of like the fruit of leadership is the impact that you actually leave on those people around you. Dr. Rod?
Yes, I was sort of hoping you'd go on to the next verse, actually, because that's when Jesus said, don't weep for me, don't mourn for me.
Mm-hmm.
And
so let me read that one.
Yeah.
So Jesus turns and said to them, daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, weep for yourselves and your children. For the time will come when you'll say, blessed are the barren women and the wombs that never bore and the breasts that never nursed. Then they will say to the mountains, fall on us, and to the hills, cover us.
Yeah, so he was actually prophesying about the fall of Jerusalem, which happened in AD 70, a bit under 40 years after he was crucified. So, he's saying, listen, stop worrying about me.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's unimaginable, of course, what he was facing, but even under that strain, the duress of the crucifixion, and he knew well what was coming, he still said, you're more important than I am.
Yeah, that's so good. And that's what I got from it is even in his deepest trials, he wasn't woe me. He wasn't, oh yeah, can you just do this for me? Or can you no, he was selfless, completely selfless of like, please don't cry for me. You don't know the pain that's actually going to come for you. You there will be this time when you wish that you didn't have kids because of what they are going to experience, that really selflessness.
See, one thing, Jesus had already resolved the issue about his own pain and suffering. He did that in Gethsemane.
Yeah, that's good.
And
purpose. We're talking about purpose.
He was scared. We've got to remember, it's pretty hard to get our heads around all of this, I guess, philosophically. But we've got to remember Jesus was God.
Yep.
But when God appeared among human beings as a human being, the Bible says he laid aside his deity. It doesn't mean he gave it up. So it doesn't mean he wasn't God for 33 years or whatever, but he laid it aside. In other words, he chose not, because as he said on his arrest, I could have called all these angels in. We could have wiped out all the opposition in the earth then and there, but he chose not to do that. And there are theological reasons why that was the case. But you see, as a man, he was terrified about what he was going to face. And that's when he prayed, Father, if there is any way, can you take this cup from me? And he said, well, not my will, but yours be done. So he went through a period of absolute terror. That's why he sweated drops of blood. That can all be explained.
Which is actually it was a medical condition.
It's rare, but it can be explained on the basis of deep, like petrifying fear. So he'd been through that, you see. He'd resolved his issue before he experienced the women lamenting.
That's really good. He dealt with it in private, and he dealt
with it. So that was why he was able to get the focus off himself and onto somebody else. So it wasn't that he was never afraid. He was petrified of what he was going to go through, and he prayed about it. And that wonderful, beautiful prayer of consecration, where he says, well, Lord, and it wasn't as if God's will was some kind of capricious thing, because, of course, there are over 200 prophecies in the Old Testament and so on. And look, it would take us hours to unpack all of this. But my point is that as a human being, he had dealt with the issue, what about me? He'd dealt with that already. And that was what empowered him under great duress to say, don't weep for me. And he was able to minister to those people, although they wouldn't have understood what he meant at the time.
Yeah, no, but we can learn from it from afar. Verse 31, for if men do these things when the tree is green, what will happen when it is dry? Understanding that, I think that the wisdom there is that we can draw from that kind of like just statement in and of itself is just a way of understanding that people do act differently in different scenarios. People, when things are going great, people behave a certain way, and then when things aren't going so great, people don't. And so I think it really reveals our character, and we should be really tested and aware of that. Dr. Rod, anything about that?
Nothing to add specifically on that verse, no.
2 other men, verse 32, 2 other men, both criminals, were also led out with him to be executed. When they came to the place called the Skull, there they crucified him along with the criminals, one on his left and the other on his right. I think for me, out of this is just what's a leadership lesson is sometimes we're talking about standing united, and sometimes we can find ourselves in, let's say, in the company of people that don't represent us, right? That we can, and just he was there with criminals, and he was being called a criminal. And we as leaders can sometimes, people can lump us in, maybe not physically, but theoretically, they can lump us in with people. I know I've been accused of, oh, you're just like so-and-so person, or you're just like those other people, or whatever. I think that we need to be able to stand firm in those situations as leaders, that we will have those accusations thrown at us. We will be lumped in with people that don't represent who we are, but they are, but that's the perception. And so we need to make sure, even though we are lumped in with those people, we still stand out. The saying of be in the world but not of the world, right? God's called us to be in the world, not of the world. And this is him. He's being treated like a criminal. He's in the presence of criminals, and he's still able to not be pulled down to being a criminal.
Yeah, and I think the other point to make too is that things happen that level us.
Oh, that's really good.
Jesus was crucified as a criminal. As I said a little earlier, that it was never actually proven that he was a criminal, but he was treated as if he was an insurrectionist, that he'd broken Roman law. And I just thinking, one of the things that levels us actually is mental illness. There are now dozens, if not hundreds, of stories, testimonies of elite sports people, very senior people in business as well, who have had struggles with depression, for example, drug addiction, and other illnesses and so on. That's one of the things that levels us. And we don't want to trivialize the crucifixion of Jesus at all, but it is just worth reflecting that, Jesus was someone who had been accepted by the ordinary people in Jerusalem as the Messiah, the Son of God, and yet he was brought down to the same level as these criminals. They wouldn't have been petty criminals. These would have been people who were actually probably they'd committed crimes of insurrection, murder, those kinds of things, which were punishable by death by the Romans. And insurrection, incidentally, was punishable by basically instant execution by crucifixion.
Okay. Verse 34, Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Although that's not how it's written in here, but it's always how I don't know. I always know it, for they know not what they do. And they divided up his clothes by casting lots. Actually, I'm going to split that a little bit. Just that first bit of, like, going back to that earlier when we're talking about Jesus, spoke about them as like was more caring about them, right? Like the women that are weeping is like, don't cry for me. This is once again, he's being wronged, like greatly wronged. And we've spoken about that tonight. It's as leaders, like, there is a leader that is seemingly being wronged right now, and coming out and just going, forgive them. We will be wronged as leaders. We can't take it personally. We can't take revenge. We can't, as we mentioned about before about there's certain psalms that call down curses on our enemies. We need to forgive. Like that's ultimately the message, isn't it? Of Easter is forgiveness. We are forgiven, and I think that's we teach forgiveness in our leadership program. Yes, free leadership development program, faith-based leadership development, link down in the description. Check it out. That week 2, we talk about that because it's so important that we understand and we receive forgiveness, because we can't be a leader carrying unforgiveness. And this is just Jesus just representing that from the start of, like, you know what? We need to forgive these people. And he knew what his purpose was there. It was ultimately forgiveness of all of our sins.
I think it's also worth considering the second half of that statement, for
Yes.
they know not what they do. And of course, in the context of his crucifixion, the Roman soldiers, for example, who actually carried out the crucifixion, they wouldn't have known. You see, because Jesus wasn't known to Pilate. Pilate didn't know who he was. That's how ignorant the Romans were about Jesus. So on that level, of course, the soldiers who were directly involved in his crucifixion, they didn't know what they were doing. But I suspect also the religious leaders didn't. They didn't believe that Jesus was the Son of God. They didn't believe that. They did believe that he was an uneducated, like, country bumpkin, basically, who was nevertheless charismatic and had undeniably carried out a lot of miracles. But they didn't know the truth about Jesus. I'm quite convinced of that. And they were so blinded, of course, by their own, that they'd been basically infiltrated, if you like, by the Babylonian spirit. And for them, their religious leadership was primarily about power and wealth. So they were totally deceived, and they were overtaken by, if you like, the spirit of Babylon, which I think is really ironic when it was happening in the temple in Jerusalem. So in that sense also, they did not know what it was they were doing. And I think that's something we need to keep in mind in our own contemporary times, when we're surrounded by attitudes, behaviours that are just absolutely contrary to what we hold dear as Christians. Others have said we're in the West, we're living in both a post and pre-Christian world, a post-Christian world, in the sense that the older generations have tasted Christianity and rejected it, and the younger generations, by and large, have never heard about it. So they're pre-Christian. In that sense, when they persecute us, they don't know what they do. And I've had this experience. They honestly cannot figure out where we come from.
Yeah.
Because our whole worldview is just so utterly foreign to them.
Yeah.
And so, yes, we do need to forgive, but we also need to understand that they're motivated in a sense by true ignorance. They don't know what it is they're doing. They really do not understand that they are persecuting children of God, people who have been adopted into God's family. They don't understand that that's what they're doing, and they don't understand the consequences.
Yeah,
And we do
feel like
understand.
Yeah, I feel
Keep
like
going.
that's a really good point of like, when I teach about forgiveness, one of the keys is empathy. And Jesus is really showing that empathy is like they just don't know what they do. Forgive them, they don't know what they're doing. And I think that if we could, we kind of do have that view when we're looking at, I mean, you look at the gender identity politics and all those crazy things that are happening especially in the United States right now, of like the Democrats versus Republicans, and there's all this craziness. We're all going like the world, like we do tend to judge other people, let's say just view other people and analyze what they're doing from the viewpoint that they have the same understanding and the same beliefs as we do, and they just don't. And I think that's actually a very good point. Like they just don't know. They genuinely believe that they're doing the right thing. And like you say, the Pharisees, the religious leaders, the religious elite, they genuinely thought that they were doing the right thing by stopping this. So, yeah. The part B of that verse is, and they divided up his clothes by casting lots. I think it's kind of interesting that even though they were crucifying this person, they saw such value in his possessions, and they were blinded by the things, and it's very easy for us as leaders to be caught up in the showing off of things, the right cars, the right, the right clothes, the right, things like that. Are you casting lots for the purpose or for someone's clothes? Like that's kind of what I see from that. I'll move on. Verse 35. The people stood watching, and the rulers even sneered at him. They said, "He saved others, let him save himself. If he is Christ, if he is the Christ of God, the chosen one." The soldiers also came up. I'm just it's kind of like the same points. I'll keep going. The soldiers also came up and mocked him, and they offered him wine and vinegar and said, "If you are the king of the Jews, save yourself." And there was written a notice above him which read, "This is the king of the Jews." I think it's funny that we as leaders might be stepping out and doing what we're called to, and other people, they will just mock us. They will talk down to us. They will talk against us. And especially if you're doing something for God, you will have people that will just be sneering against you. And that's just going to be part of your journey. God never promised that Christianity was going to be easy. God never said your calling, if you follow your calling, everything will be beautiful. And that's what that's kind of like the difference between, this personal development movement and actually true Christianity is you need to follow your calling. Yes, you'll find peace. Yes, you'll find fulfillment. Yes, you'll find purpose, but it'll be difficult. And you have opposition and you have trials. He promised us that, unfortunately. And actually, Dr. Rod, I heard someone recently put like that this is the king of the Jews. Apparently, that was put up by Pilate. Is that correct?
It was the Romans doing. I don't know. I'd have to check. I don't know whether Pilate necessarily directly ordered that, because that wasn't a Roman crime. That wasn't a crime to claim to be the king of the Jews. And by the way, there were lots of people, self-proclaimed prophets who made all kinds of claims about themselves. It didn't really bother the Romans because they weren't breaking any Roman law. It was just an issue for the religious leaders. And it's quite interesting that his crime was to claim to be the king of the Jews, because that, as my understanding, that wasn't a crime in Russian law, in Roman law. That wasn't a crime.
Dr. Rod.
I think I've been talking too long and the old brain's slowing down a bit. But yeah, that wasn't it wasn't a crime. You see, Pilate couldn't pin anything on him, and to Pilate's credit, he tried his darndest not to crucify. But you see, almost certainly what he was weighing up was, well, look, you know what? If I don't do this, there's going to be a riot, and I'm going to get into trouble, because his job was to stop any kind of unrest.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's why I say that the sort of proximate reason for Jesus' crucifixion was purely political, right? God had a much bigger reason for it, but
than government,
political.
Yeah.
I
heard recently that a pastor actually shared an incredible one, and I can't remember where it was, but they said that there's suspicion that was Pilate that put it up. And I actually then when I was reading this, I was like, I've always been taught that sign was there to mock Jesus. I wonder whether, because we know that Pilate was kind of torn with this, because he's like, we know that, maybe Pilate had a bit of a revelation, and he's like, I'm going to put this sign up because I actually genuinely believe this guy is the king of the Jews and the son of God. Like, I wonder whether he had a revelation and he was like, you know what, like in his conversation with Jesus, he saw something or whatever, and maybe he had a revelation. He's like, no, I'm going to put a sign up that actually says this is.
Look, as far as I know, there's no extra biblical evidence to suggest that Pilate sort of became, well, he wouldn't become a Christian, but if he did put the sign up, most likely he was actually sending a message to the religious leaders that this guy's innocent, because it wasn't a crime to claim to be king of the Jews under Roman law.
Yeah.
He didn't break any Roman law.
Yeah.
Right. He was crucified innocent. In a way, he had to be to fulfill Scripture. So if it is true that Pilate actually ordered that sign be written and erected, and it may well have been, I doubt very much that it happened because he somehow got converted or anything like that.
No, I don't necessarily mean that. I just wonder whether he had some sort of revelation. I mean, there's something different about this guy, and
look, that might have been the case, but I don't think he would have had time to even form that conclusion, because he knew nothing about Jesus. Jesus wasn't before him for very long, and my guess is he was much more worried about the possibility of riots, and he was listening to the noise of the crowd. If he did it, my guess is the statement that he was making was that this guy did not break Roman law. Remember, basically, Pilate washed his hands. He said, I wash my hands of this. I'm not responsible for this. So he never found Jesus guilty. He merely tried to cover his own butt because he was concerned that there was going to be a riot.
That's good. That's good. So let's keep going. Like we said, this was going to be a bit of a long one because there's a lot in this, but we just really wanted to just draw out so much stuff from here. Verse 39, one of the other criminals who hung there hurled insults at him. Aren't you the Christ? Save yourself. I think it's kind of interesting that the guy is up on a cross in the same punishment as you. and sitting there mocking as well. But I'll continue. But the other criminal on the other side of him rebuked him. "Don't you fear God?" He said, "since you are under the same sentence. We are punished justly, for we are getting what our deeds deserve. But this man has done nothing wrong." I think that's going back to our verse, or our kind of theme of today, of like standing united, and kind of sometimes we have to stand up for things that are unjust, and some people are going to be insulting and mocking and speaking badly about some people around us, some leaders that we are with. We need to stand firm. Even this guy was a criminal and he was wrong. He was hanging on a cross as well, but even from there he was able to defend Christ, because he saw the unjust mockery, the unfair assaults that Jesus was getting, and even from his position, he was able to stand united with Jesus. And as we know, as the story goes on, then he said to Jesus, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Jesus answered him, "I tell you the truth, today you will be with me in paradise." And I think that's a beautiful picture of standing united in the face of challenges and everything like that, both from Jesus and from the criminal, that Jesus was able to still stand united with this person who actually called out to him. He may have done things wrong, and we as leaders may have people around us that have done things wrong, but they will stand up. If they stand up for you and they're standing united, like we need to be united with them, but not. The person still died. The criminal still paid his consequences. He still had consequences. It's not about negating consequences, but we can still stand united with people. Dr. Rod?
I don't know that I've got too much more to add there. Both of the people who were crucified with Jesus were criminals, and there's no debate about that. One recognized Jesus for who he was, and the other didn't. And like one of the things you'll find in life is that some people will recognize you for what God has assigned you to, for the gifts that he's given to you, and others won't. And, again, I don't want to trivialize the crucifixion, because it's such a solemn commemoration for us around Easter time. But praise God, we're not going to actually literally be nailed to a cross either. But I think it is an observation that we can make, is that people don't always recognize the assignment that God has given us, and they don't recognize the gifts, the talents that God has given us. Some will stand with us, and some will stand against us.
That's good. Hey, that was an excerpt from our On the Cube Leadership podcast. If you enjoyed it, give it a thumbs up, put a comment below. And if you want to see more content like this, faith-based leadership development content, make sure you check out our channel, give it a subscribe, and hit the bell notification so that you'll be notified when we release new content.